be. So welcome back again to Shita. Got you a little bit of a better view there. So yeah, today we're gonna, same as yesterday, we're gonna start with a short meditation, focusing on the breath. So let's begin by getting into a comfortable meditation posture with the back straight. And then simply allowing our awareness to descend into the space of the body, paying attention to all the different sensations arising throughout the body. And if you find any points of tension or discomfort, then using the out breath as an opportunity to gently relax and soften those places that feel tight. And we can take 3 deep breaths. And then simply allowing the breathing to rejoin its natural rhythm without forcing or manipulating the breath in any way, as we settle more and more deeply into the stillness and the silence. And settling the mind by releasing all concerns, hopes, and fears to do with the past and the future, and simply allowing our mind to rest happily in the present moment for this brief meditation. And having prepared our body and mind in this way, we can turn our attention to the breath, focusing on the physical sensations of the breath, either at the level of the abdomen or with the sensations of the air coming in and out of the nose. And simply allowing our awareness to rest there, observing the entire duration of the breath, from beginning to end and on to the next, in a continuity of mindfulness. And if you find yourself distracted by sounds or thoughts, whatever it might be, then simply relax, release the distraction, and return your awareness to the breath again and again. And gently relaxing our awareness on the breath. Right, so welcome again, as I said, to the second day of this How to Meditate course. And so yesterday we kind of introduced the basic concepts, which will be our kind of springboard towards what we're going to be continually talking about these next 4 days. So especially we covered what really the mind is, because as we said, Buddhism being a science of the mind, then it is very important to know what it is that we're dealing with, what it is that we're talking about when we say mind, mind, my mind, his mind, her mind. When we say this word mind, what are we actually referring to? And it's really mostly to do with our conscious experience, right? This experience, the word experience has a very lot of meaning that it carries, in the sense of not only our sensory experience, in the sense of having to do with the 5 senses of the eyes, the ears, and so forth, but also to do with our mental experience, right? Our world of thought, of fantasy, of dreaming, of remembering, and all these different types of mental experience. And we saw how this mind is really striving towards happiness, and it doesn't want to suffer. And yet we face all these various roadblocks because we have all this kind of weird mental states, which we call afflictions or disturbing emotions or whatever, that seek to convince us that the main source of happiness lies outside, right? That if we can only get enough of this, that, or the other, then we will be able to, then we will be happy. If we just get a bit more, then we'll be happy. Then we get that, and it's like, oh, but then I'll be happy, and then, and tomorrow never comes. So we made this distinction between what we could call this stimulus-based happiness and kind of a genuine happiness. The stimulus-based happiness being generally the type of happiness that we associate with the 5 senses, because it is something that arises in dependence upon some kind of stimulus. So the food, the drink, the sights, the music, the conversation, whatever type of stimulus it is, it triggers some kind of experience within us, right? But it can also be an inner stimulus, right? Like remembering something, fantasizing about something, imagining something. Also, this can be said to be a type of inner stimulus, right? But it behaves much in the same way. If you tend to think about it, if something like a pleasant memory was in the nature of happiness, then we just need to do one good thing, and then we can just continue remembering it for the rest of our lives, and that would be good enough, because the memory doesn't decline in its ability to give us happiness. So just like the chocolate cake, the now infamous chocolate cake, it is something that has diminishing returns, right? That actually, the more we use of it, the more we persist with it, actually we don't become more happy, we actually become less happy, because of the various types of causes and conditions that have to come into place. So then we saw, so really when we're talking about this is kind of a quick review also of what we did yesterday, but also as a springboard to continue discussing where we left off. So again, when we're exploring these 4 questions of the 4 Noble Truths now, then we can ask, well, what is suffering and what is happiness by extension? So when we're really discussing these different types of happiness and different types of suffering, so just like I said before, in terms of the stimulus-based and genuine, then the classical presentation is actually in terms of 3 types of suffering, really. In terms of being the suffering of suffering, which is a very imaginative name, I know, the suffering of change, and what is called the pervasive compounded suffering. Don't worry too much about the name, but basically it is kind of talking about the same thing, but from a different angle, right? That if we think about different types of suffering, right? Suffering has a lot of variety to it. So when we talk about this first type of suffering, the suffering of suffering, this is the suffering we all know is suffering. It's something very obvious, very explicitly suffering, like the headache, we bang our knee, the boyfriend, girlfriend dumps us, the very kind of obvious, kind of manifest suffering that we face kind of on a day-to-day basis. And this is something that, everyone would recognize as suffering, everyone, including animals, right? Also, the animals know this type of suffering very well, and they work very hard to avoid it. Now, when we move on to the second level of suffering, the suffering of change, this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about this stimulus-based happiness, right? So again, it's not to get too pessimistic, but from looking at it from a certain point of view, whenever we try to attain happiness on the basis of these external stimuli, then it is not really in the nature of happiness, as I explained yesterday, but rather they are something that are unsatisfactory, right? Suffering might be too big of a word in this case. It evokes too much of the first type of suffering in our mind, but it's definitely something which doesn't bring us satisfaction. And so it is because of all the reasons we mentioned before about it changing, about it finishing, about it not actually, about it having diminishing returns and so forth. And so it is actually called the suffering of change. It is the unsatisfactoriness of change, right? So this is a slightly deeper level to think about that actually the stimulus-based happiness is not really a true type of happiness because it is actually in this nature of unsatisfactoriness. Now, thirdly, in terms of this pervasive type of suffering, this is a little bit tough to get one's head around, but very basically speaking, it's that even just having this type of a body and this type of a mind, where, especially in terms of the mind, we have all these different mental afflictions running wild, like anger and attachment, and sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, just by the very nature of having such a changeable mind, then there's a certain type of very pervasive level of discomfort about that, right? Such that at any moment, it can change into a suffering of suffering, or at any moment, it changes into an unsatisfactory of change, because the mind is really unstable. It is not able to sit still. It is always looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And this state of unrest is in itself a type of suffering, right? Because it is something that is obscuring this kind of very calm, clear, blissful nature of the mind, which we talked about a little bit yesterday. So, so in terms of these three types, when we investigate what is happiness and what is suffering, then these are the kind of things we can be mindful of, really just try and analyze these different things and really see how we, on the one hand, okay, so the suffering of suffering, there's not much to really think about there, but especially in terms of this suffering of change or the unsatisfactory of change, really analyzing these different objects and analyzing our relationship with the objects. Because I don't want you to get the idea that there's anything particularly wrong with the object itself. It's not that we suddenly have to give up, we don't have to give up chocolate cake and Netflix and, having the boyfriend, girlfriend or whatever. There's nothing wrong with the objects themselves. But there is something wrong in the way that we perceive them, right? Because in the back of our mind, intellectually, we know that the chocolate cake is not going to be, lead us to ultimate happiness. But somewhere in the back of our mind, we still carry around this idea, this notion, this view that these things are in the nature of happiness. And if we could only arrange all these different things in the outside world into the perfect combination, then we'll be happy, right? So then that leads us down this rabbit hole as we discussed, right? So again, what I'm really talking about here already is already moving on to this second type of question about the reason behind this. Why do we experience these types of suffering? So again, it's nothing really to do with the external world itself. It's nothing wrong with these objects, but it's because of these different mental afflictions that exist in our mind, that tell us all these stories, that tell us all these lies that we absolutely believe in and buy into. So, and again, I'm talking about anger, attachment, jealousy, pride, and so on and so forth. And then on the basis of these wrong mental attitudes, we then engage in a variety of actions, what we call karma. Karma just means actions. So we can think about the actions of our body, speech, and mind. We get angry and we might just hold on to that anger, and that's an action of the mind, just being angry, 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 angry. That's an action of the mind. Then again, we might choose to say something on the basis of that anger. Someone says nasty to us and we say, back to them, and blah, 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 and then we engage in hateful speech, right? Angry actions of speech. And it could even get more stronger than this, and we can, let the punch fly, and then this is angry behavior of the body. So we engage in all these various actions, which again lead us back to these three levels of suffering. Because again, just to give a very simple example with my obsession for chocolate cake, I don't really like chocolate cake that much, but it's just a nice example. So so if we go back, so my really strong desire and strong attachment for this chocolate cake will lead me to think that actually, I've had a bit of a crappy day. So if I just am able to have a chocolate cake right now, it will solve all my problems, right? So then that leads me to go off and look for a chocolate cake and go on this quest for a chocolate cake and maybe eat more and more chocolate cake and have so much. And through this action of going to eat the chocolate cake, I'm going to experience a lot of pleasure at first, which is again, the stimulus-based pleasure, which we can also call the unsatisfactory of change. Because if I continue letting my attachment run the show and continue to eat more and more and more chocolate cake, it will eventually, give me a jippy tummy. So that will be the very explicit type of suffering. So this is just a very simple example, just to show how, what starts as something very basic or something very subtle in the mind can, become greater and greater as it manifests outwardly, as we kind of allow it to take over the mind first, and then we allow it to take over our actions, and then through our actions we, end up experiencing certain consequences as a result, like that. So now as we move on, we can ask, can we put a stop to suffering? Well, as we said, yes, we can. Because as we said, these afflictions are all mental states which are wrong with respect to reality in one form or another. And so it is really up to us to investigate these states of mind and really to see how they are deceiving us and whether we can try to weaken our reliance upon these states of mind. But more generally speaking, there's various types of way that we can put a stop to these levels of suffering. The getting progressively more complicated. The first one being just an elimination of the conditions, right? If we remove ourselves from the situation where we're surrounded by these things that trigger us, then it is far less likely that these types of negative emotions arise, right? Anger is a good example of this, because anger is not something that we tend to carry around all the time. There's things like resentment, of course, but this kind of very explosive anger is not something we carry around most of the time. It is something that is triggered when we meet with a particular stimulus. Generally, the person that we don't like, or some kind of a situation that really annoys us. And so if we're able to keep ourselves away from certain conditions or certain stimuli that we know trigger us, and especially in the beginning, this can be very helpful. This can be very helpful in giving us some space, giving us some mental space to work on our mind in actually trying to find a deeper solution to the problem. But in the beginning, it can be a very helpful tool. This is why a lot of meditators go off into retreat. It's not because they think the world is crap. It's really because they wish to have the nice atmosphere and the nice surroundings to give them that mental space to then be able to go in deeper and work on the mind. The next kind of level is ceasing incorrect mental attention. So this we're going to be talking a lot more about tomorrow, particularly when we look at the shamatha, or the concentration type of meditation. But it is really about thinking about where we put our mind at, right? The mind is always busy doing something. So it may as well be something good rather than bad. But we don't tend to really think about what our mind is doing on a moment-to-moment basis, such that we end up actually paying attention to a lot of things that are really kind of very useless and actually quite destructive, and not really paying attention to the things that really matter. So again, taking the example of something like anger, we really amplify it through this incorrect mental attention. And what I mean by that, let's say you get up in the morning and you're on your way to work, or you're on your way to school or whatever, and something happens and suddenly this guy cuts you off in traffic or bumps into you on the street, and they say a rude word to you. Yeah, they say one rude word and then they keep walking on. You know, oh, how dare they? My God, that was so rude. How rude. And then then you continue thinking about it, right? You continue mulling over it in your mind, like, oh, what did he said that, and he said, how dare he, and who is this guy to tell me that thing, and so on and so forth, right? So actually, if we think about it, the uttering of that word took maybe 5 seconds at most, right? It was 5 seconds of hearing a particular sound. That was it. But then it is our mind placing this, what is called incorrect mental attention, that we're kind of obsessing over it. We think about it again and again and again. And by paying so much attention to it, we make it grow. We make it grow bigger. Suddenly something that actually only happened for 5 seconds in the morning can ruin our whole day. And for the whole day, we're suddenly snapping at people and we're angry and, oh, we want to get back and we plan our revenge and And it can take a very long time until we kind of get bored of it, or we get tired of it, and the mind kind of goes off to pay attention to something else. Then the anger kind of subsides. But a lot of the problem often lies with these afflictions. It is often really a problem of attention, right? So this is something that can be corrected through developing a calm abiding, or through developing a calmer, kind of more focused type of mind, where we have a greater control over what we pay attention to. So we'll be talking about that in a lot more detail tomorrow. And then the final kind of level of kind of putting a stop to suffering is what is called a true cessation. And I kind of explained it briefly yesterday in one of the questions that was asked, that again, since these afflicted minds are somehow incorrect with respect to reality, and we can analyze them and come to know the truth, and thus completely eliminate that type of mind, that type of afflicted mind from arising again. Once we're able to really deprogram our mind, if you like, dehabituate our mind from that kind of disposition towards anger or attachment or whatever it might be, such that it doesn't even arise again. It doesn't even have the potential to arise again. That is what is called the true cessation. And again, it's something that comes after really prolonged practice, really prolonged, very directed practice to really see the truth behind the lies that these types of mind are telling us. Because once we're convinced of the truth, then we won't continue believing the lies again. And once we don't believe the lies again, then it has no power over us anymore. So once we're able to get to that state where there's not only can something arise, but we don't believe it, but the thing doesn't even arise in the first place. That's what we call a true cessation. That's kind of the very long-term goal of the practice. So, have patience with that one. It's something that is something that is the potential of our mind. It's something that is possible for our mind. Because again, unlike this kind of Western psychological idea that all these mind are, like anger and attachment, are intrinsic or kind of innate to the mind, from the Buddhist point of view, they're what called adventitious, which I know I had to get a dictionary the first time as well. It basically means that they're not a natural part of the mind. There's something that is temporary. There's something that is external but abiding together with the mind. So the example often given is like dirty water, right? If we have a cup of dirty water, then the water itself is clean. Water is just water. Water is H2O, right? The dirt in the water is dirty. But because they are mixed, we see them as one thing and we think, oh, now this is dirty water and we probably shouldn't drink it, right? But that doesn't mean that we cannot get rid of the dirt and we still have the water there. And the water was always there, right? The water was always there and it was always water. So in the same way, the natural clarity and knowing aspect of the mind is always there. It's just the nature of the mind. Whereas these kind of all these types of mind, which are based on unknowing, which are based on kind of believing these lies about reality, they're like the dirt, right? Which can be gotten rid of on the basis of this fourth column, right? So they can be eliminated by way of training the mind to eliminate these negative states of mind. And as we will be talking about in the final 3 days, this can kind of be subsumed into these 3 types of methods, which are more discussing them in terms of the type of the meditation, how we kind of think about these ways of attaining happiness rather than the kind of more classical groupings themselves. But nevertheless, one is, like I said, to develop this mind of calm abiding, which is a very calm, clear, and concentrated mind, right? Which then eliminates this incorrect mental attention. Developing special insight means using the analytical meditations to, again, see the lies behind these different mental afflictions, and by using this kind of idea of an antidote, right, to kind of generate the mind that is able to eliminate anger, the opposite of anger, in seeing the mind that is able to eliminate ignorance, which is wisdom, and so forth. We are able to kind of replace all these negative minds with their positive counterparts. And while the positive counterpart exists in the mind and is stable in the mind, it leaves no room for the negative counterpart. Together with that, we have compassion, because even if we're working within our own mind, we see that actually, if we look around us, all living beings are in the same situation as we are. And actually, we are completely dependent upon them for pretty much all of our happiness, all right? So while our mind is in our own hands, again, like we said, we cannot discount the external world. And that external world is mostly made up of other people and the way that they interact with that world and with us. And we see that actually, on the one hand, all of them are wishing for happiness, not wishing to suffer. All of them are struggling in the same way that we're struggling with our mind, with our afflictions. And yet we are so completely interdependent upon one another that it simply doesn't make sense to allow these types of minds like anger and attachment to arise. But rather, we give way to this understanding based on this nature of reality, this interdependent nature of reality, to generate these minds which are outwardly focused towards others, like love and compassion, and taking responsibility to help others. And this, again, allows the mind to open to the wider world. And again, it is something that has a great transformative power on the mind. We will see how that works in practice. So that was a kind of very long-winded recap of what we did yesterday. But it is important, like I said, to get this very solid foundation. So now we can move on to the second day's topic, which kind of just moves along because we've already started discussing this fourth column about how do we transform the mind, and the short answer being meditation, right? But then that's kind of a big word, especially these days when we see all these kind of different, meditation techniques being advertised everywhere. You can do this type of meditation and this type of meditation. It's becoming almost as common as this type of yoga and this type of yoga. So really, it's important to understand what it is that we are talking about when we say meditation. So first of all, just in terms of the word, then in the word meditation is a translation of the Sanskrit bhavana. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And there's a lot of Hindi and probably Sanskrit speakers in the audience, but this bhavana, which as I understand it, really is talking about a sense of a mental cultivation, or a development of some sort, which really is referring to the development of the cultivation of these positive mental qualities, this development of the mind, eliminating these negative qualities and bringing out these positive qualities. Then when we move on to the Tibetan, then the Tibetan word is gom, yeah, which again it's one of these words that has a lot of various types of meaning. One being simply to familiarize the mind, right? Which is this idea of familiarity or a habit, right? Because the mind is seen very much to be a creature of habit. So when we are meditating on something, when we are trying to develop the mind in this way, it is really about trying to train the mind in certain positive habits while reducing the negative habits of the mind. Because through progressive and sustained habituation with certain states of mind, those states of mind become stronger. And likewise, if we are not very well trained with certain states of mind, then those states of mind are weaker. They're difficult to develop, whether we're talking about the positive states of mind or the negative states of mind. So this is something, one kind of idea about the mind that is at first a bit weird to get one's head around, because actually then that means that if you ask the question, well, why do we have anger? Or why, Shaha, why are you such an angry person? Then from the Buddhist point of view, we're not looking to point our fingers either, like, I don't point my finger at mommy and daddy, right? It's not their fault that I'm angry, right? I'm not pointing my finger at God or any kind of outside kind of deity of some kind that created me and gave me angry, so how dare they? And likewise, my parents, they gave me anger and how dare they? I didn't ask to be born. Not like that. And it doesn't arise out of nothing. It's not that anger just kind of popped into being out of nothing and there's no explanation for it whatsoever, but rather the answer to the question from the Buddhist point of view is in relation with the habit, right? With habituation, with familiarization with anger. So the reason why I'm so good at anger, well, it's because I practiced anger in the past, right? I've had many, long and seasoned veteran practitioner of anger, that when something annoys me, I get angry, I get irritated, and we spend all that time letting the mind be angry. And that is like practice. It's practicing anger, right? It's familiarizing the mind with anger. And you can see that some people, it sometimes happens in quite a short space of time, because anger is a very strong emotion, so it can have a very strong effect on the mind, that people who are often angry tend to get angrier and angrier as time goes on. It's something that creates a very strong habit in people. It doesn't mean it's not reversible, but without kind of any sustained effort in that direction, it actually becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. But likewise with the positive side, why are you so kind? Well, it's not just, oh, I was born that way, or, God made me that way, or, oh, there's no reason for it. Some people are just kind and some people are just not kind. From the Buddhist point of view, those are not valid answers. But again, it is really to do with our habituation with it. If we spend time developing that part of the mind, then it will get stronger and stronger and stronger. It will become something that we are able to do with more ease, right? And this is the same with kind of most things in life, really, if you think about it, whether it's about learning to play the piano, learning any kind of skill whatsoever, what they'll tell you is what it requires is practice, 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 right? Because it's through familiarization, through practice, that we get better at it. I like to think of the example of walking, right? Because it's something that we kind of take for granted now. But I don't know if any of you can remember from when you were a baby, but you can see other babies that when we're born, we don't know how to walk, right? And as a baby, you're crawling around, and it's you can't even stand up, let alone walk. So it seems, I can imagine that for the baby, it's like, it would seem, he looks around and all these adults are walking around. It's like, how did they do it? Seems impossible. Seems really super difficult. And you try and you start to get up, and then you fall over, and you try again, and then you fall over. And it's something that requires a sustained effort to kind of develop it. And finally, you're able to take one step, and then 2 steps, and then 3. And now we don't even have to think about it. And not only that, we've even forgot the very experience of having to learn it in the first place, such that we think it's something innate almost, right? But there's nothing innate about it. It is something that we learned, right? But we got so good at it that it becomes natural. And we got so good at it for such a long period of time that we even forgot that we had to learn it in the first place. So it is the same way with all the different states of mind that we are dealing with, in that they've been part of our mind for such a very long time, right? From the Buddhist point of view, for lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes. But it is really up to us and what we have done with our mind to really show us what it is that, where the mind is at, is really in dependence upon what we've been paying attention to or not, what we have been developing or not, right? So if we've put our time and effort into developing love and compassion, then we'll be more loving and compassionate. If we spent our time developing anger and attachment, then we'll be more angry and attached people. It's as simple as that. So meditation is seeking to use this quality of the mind to direct the effort, not just allow the mind to just kind of do whatever it wants and allow it to go in whichever direction it wants, but rather to think, okay, since I'm in the driving seat, I can then now direct my effort in a particular direction such to eliminate these harmful negative states of mind and cultivate these positive states of mind, like that. So just to kind of reiterate the point, we find this in many kind of texts, that this idea of the mind being a creature of habit. So it says in the Lamrim Chenmo, which is a great path of the stages of the path of enlightenment, which says, if you practice these continuously, right, which can refer to any type of practice, then since the mind acts according to habit, even what was difficult to train in at first will become natural, right? So again, we kind of we now understand kind of what that's pointing to, this idea that just through the act of developing the mind in a continuous practice, since the mind always follows upon that habit, follows upon that habituation, then even things that were difficult in the beginning can become natural for us. And likewise, Shantideva in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life says, there is nothing whatsoever that does not become easier through familiarization, right? And this is supposed to really encourage us, to really show to us that, you know, it's really all within our hands, within our capacity to actually, you know, enact change within our mind. It really just depends what where we put our efforts, where we put our mind to, and how we work to develop the mind. Okay, so like that. So this is one important aspect of what it means to meditate, to develop the mind. Another very important aspect that I would just like to get into before we get into start looking at the various subdivisions is that what is kind of called the kind of a presentation called the view, meditation, and behavior, which is a very important kind of relationship between the three, which kind of works as follows. The main two which we have to worry about are kind of view and behavior, right? And we kind of talked about this already before and in the previous class, that actually we have various types of views about the world. And what I mean by view, like a world view, or the way in which we perceive things, the way in which we think about things. And that view will directly affect the way in which we behave, right? So again, I gave the example with the flat world that will, you know, lead to all kinds of weird behavior. But actually, in terms of any kind of view that we hold, you know, if we think that killing animals is no big deal, right, then we're much more likely to eat meat, right? Whereas if we have this very strong view that actually no animal should ever be killed, you know, whatsoever, especially just for our own gain, then we're much more likely to be vegetarian. So our behavior and what we eat, whether we eat meat or we're not eating meat, is really informed by our view about how we see the killing of animals and their utilization for meat. And once we go down this rabbit hole, it's actually, it's a very pervasive kind of quality of the mind that we hold certain views about what is right and what is wrong. And then our behavior follows on from that. Now, the bridge between these two is meditation. Because as we said, meditation seeks to kind of transform the mind and transform the view aspect of things, right? You can say that in terms of the overall practice, we attack it from both sides. If we're talking about the behavior side of things, and in order to prevent ourselves from engaging in all sorts of unhealthy behavior, then we're starting to delve into the realm of ethics, into the realm of morality, and the type of actions which we should and shouldn't engage in, based on what we see kind of as helpful and unhelpful actions. But again, that is something that is informed by our view, right? But until we're able to change our view, since it is quite a long-term project, it can also be helpful to attack it from the other side and say, okay, in the very least, I'm not going to kill people. I'm going to try not to lie. I'm going to try not to do these actions, which I very easily can recognize as negative, because I know that they're going to have negative impact on myself and others, right? Even when the temptation arises. Right? Maybe not to kill someone, but to lie, or if the temptation arises, we might think like that and try to avoid doing those actions. But in terms of the meditation, then we're mainly talking about this side of things, the view side of things. And again, as I said before, generally we have a certain world view of how things are and our place in the world, but that is kind of muddled by all these negative mental states, such as anger and attachment and whatever just happens to be bubbling up to the surface of our mind, right? And so we can see this actually quite often, if we are having a very good day and we're kind of very peaceful and calm, and someone says something nasty to us, we might shrug it off, right? So, and based on our particular view in that moment, which is informed by the various states of mind which are active, then we have a certain behavior of how we react to that certain event. But then if we're having kind of a crappy day and we're very angry that day, and the exact same thing happens where the person says something nasty to us and suddenly we're up in arms. We're going to punch him, we're going to shout at him, we're going to behave in a completely different way. Because in that moment, anger has taken over the mind, and it is giving us a very different view of reality compared to what a loving, compassionate mind, a patient mind what kind of a view that will give us of reality. So like that. So really we're trying to change that by changing the view, by changing these minds which affect the way that we see reality, the way that we view reality, such then that our behavior naturally changes as a result, right? We can take some measures to temper our behavior such that we don't get ourselves into too much trouble. But at the end of the day, the best way to change our behavior is through really working on the mind and the view aspect of things, such that we are able to just naturally react or naturally behave in a way that is concordant with that, right? Because then this kind of this brings up a point where we can, you can also divide this type of view into two, which is like what we would call, one would be like an intellectually held view, right? A very kind of intellectually held view, as opposed to like an innate view or an internalized view, let's say. So, and it makes a very big difference, right? For example, if we want to, people who smoke, right? So smoking is a type of behavior, right? So now we might say, well, okay, well, what kind of view informs that behavior? Because actually, we all see we've all heard what all the medical experts say, and we see the packet with the skull and bones and all the big smoking kill signs. And so I don't think there's anyone anymore that doesn't know that smoking is harmful to your health. So by that logic, why don't they stop smoking, right? So that is exactly the difference between a view which is merely kind of intellectual or merely very kind of superficial, as opposed to a view which has really been internalized, right? Because of course, intellectually, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, that smoking is bad for you, and excess drinking is bad for you, and not doing any exercise is bad for you, and all these different things. We know these things, right? We're not stupid. We've heard them. We know them. But we are still haven't kind of convinced ourselves of the truth of it in a really kind of, we haven't really internalized it as truth for ourselves, right? So this is where the process of meditation comes in the sense of what is called the process of what is generally spoken of as listening, contemplating, and meditating, which is just another way to say that, when we learn anything, or where we try to take on these different types of information, which will later inform our view in some way, the first way in which we take in any new information is through hearing it in some way. That can be a very kind of broad type of hearing, because it can refer to hearing it from someone else, as you are right now. You can watch YouTube videos, you can read it in books, you can have a various way of actually receiving some kind of external input, right? Some kind of information that you get from the external world. And actually, most of the stuff that we learn initially through some kind of engagement with the external world, whether it's through our teachers, whether it's just through, putting our hand in the fire and getting burnt, whatever kind of, the whole process begins with some kind of experience or input that we get from the outside. But then that's where the work of the outside kind of begins, because once we have received that input, it is up to us to then think about it. This is the second stage of contemplation, where it's really up to us to really analyze the information that we have received and really see, being very scientific, does this make sense? Doesn't it make sense? If yes, why? If no, why? If it were the case, what would be the consequences of that? Does that work? Does that make sense? Is it contradictory? Right? Being very scientific. No one is asking you, this also applies to what I'm saying here in all these courses that you listen to in Tushita and any kind of teaching that you listen to. And we should be very critical. We should be very scientific about what we hear and really analyze it and see whether it makes sense or not, right? And that's already in our hands. That's nothing. People can give you pointers in different ways in which to think, but at the end of the day, it is up to you to really think about it and think about it and think about it. Because it is within that process that then that thinking becomes meditation in a sense. It is something that kind of, it flows into the final stage of meditation, because it is the process of meditation which then makes it go from up here to down here. I can't get high enough to down here, right? To internalize it, right? To make it go from something which is merely intellectual to something that we kind of hold to be true. And so on the basis of our having thought about this, that, and the other, and seen it to be truth or seen it to be useful, then we might decide to meditate on it. We might decide to cultivate it. We might decide to familiarize our mind with it, such that it stops being something which we merely hold, oh yeah, that's interesting, it's, and put the book back on the shelf. We really see it as something useful, as something beneficial, and so would really like to, have it transform our mind and transform our view. And by transforming our mind and transforming our view, it then transforms our behavior and has all those knock-on effects. Again, thinking back to what we saw with the Four Noble Truths about how the affliction leads to actions, which is behavior, which leads to the different types of suffering. But it can also lead to happiness if we're able to switch those wrong views, switch those afflictions with correct views, with minds that do perceive reality correctly, such as, the opposite of ignorance is kind of wisdom, right? And the opposite of anger is love, right? The opposite of attachment is there's no good word for it in English, but it's non-attachment. Doesn't mean detachment, doesn't mean we don't care about anything, but it is seeing things in a more realistic way, right? And the best way to test for that, we'll see later when we talk about these things, is what happens when the attachment doesn't get what it wants, right? Then we get angry. That's the test. But anyway, we'll talk more about that later. So this is the kind of process where we try to affect change in the mind by way of transforming the view, by way of familiarizing the mind, by kind of defamiliarizing the mind or dehabituating the mind from all these wrong views, such as anger and attachment, and all these minds which really cloud our view of reality. And we'll get more into this in the coming days, how they do that and why and so forth. And replacing those minds with minds that are more based on our investigation, based on our seeking of the truth, replacing these minds with minds which accord with reality, and therefore will lead us to behavior which is, again, also concordant with reality and conducive to our own happiness. Like that. So how do we do that? Let's dive into it, because again, we don't have that much time. So when we, in general, meditations are a great many different types of meditations. But if we try to start dividing them up into different categories, so we have the main category of meditation, right? But if we start to try to divide them or try to categorize them, then actually most if not all meditations fall into one of these two basic categories, which are I would say most correctly called placement meditation and analytical meditation, right? But they can be called by various names in dependence upon their goal. So mainly we can see on this side, we can see shamatha, which it translates as calm abiding, shine in Tibetan. And this is about developing our concentration, right? Really developing a very calm, peaceful, stable, and concentrated mind, which is really able to focus and really place the mind wherever we wish to place it, right? So a meditation which has that kind of a goal to it is called shamatha, or calm abiding meditation. But in general, the category of meditation which is where the mind is placed on one object and it remains there is called a placement meditation. And that has a variety of functions, not limited to the developing of this more calm and concentrated mind. Because actually, once we develop a more concentrated mind, we want to use that concentration to really deepen the insights that we gain through analytical meditation. And when we do that, it's not really, in a sense, it's not calm abiding anymore, but it is a placement meditation. So the main point to understand it is a meditation where we place the mind on a particular object and have it stay there, holding that mind in order to habituate the mind with that object. Because we're spending time with that object. We're really holding our focus and holding that object. On the other side, we have what is called analytical meditations, or vipassana in Sanskrit, which is sometimes translated as special insight. Now here, quite often people are surprised to hear that this type of thing is even considered meditation, because most people think that this first category is what we call meditation, right? But actually, this type of meditation is where we use the more imaginative, more thinking, analytical part of the mind to really investigate things. And not just kind of thinking or daydreaming or something like that, but really, as much as one is able to develop focus using this first type of meditation, using that level of focus like a very sharp tool to be able to analyze and investigate, turning that very sharp and clear mind upon the mind itself, to be able to investigate these various states of mind, analyze them, and really gain insight about them, to see how they are false and how they lead us into trouble and all these various types of things. But it can also be to develop various types of qualities. So in that sense, we can again divide this type of meditation into two, which very literally translated from the Tibetan would kind of be called analyzing the object and taking on the aspect, which doesn't really mean much on the surface. But what does that mean? So these are two different kinds of functions when we start analyzing things. So there's a method of analysis which is called analyzing the object, right? Where we are actually taking a specific object that we wish to analyze, and we start analyzing whether this is true, whether this is false, is it correct, is it not correct, how does it exist, is what I think about it correct or incorrect? Like, for example, if we think that, we all tend to have this idea that, a certain sense of permanence of things. Whereas, while actually most things in reality are very impermanent, they are changing moment by moment. But the mind doesn't really, because we don't really see that change, and because we're not really that aware of that change, then it is something that is very difficult to see. And so actually we see things as very permanent. We grasp onto the very strong permanence of things. And that's why we're surprised when, when the cup breaks, when the person leaves us, when, we suddenly don't know who this person anymore, we suddenly find the wrinkle. All these things are when the mind is confronted by a reality we weren't expecting, which is the idea that things are permanent when in fact they're impermanent. So analyzing reality to see whether things are permanent or impermanent is a case of analyzing the object, right? We're analyzing the object itself to see whether the way we perceive it is correct or not. On the other hand, we can talk about meditations where we're taking on the aspect, right? So here, the point is not so much to analyze the object of the meditation, but rather to generate the mind in a certain state, right? So when we say aspect, it's more like generating the mind in a certain state. So that, for example, when we say, I wish to meditate on love, to generate love, then meditating on love, if we were to take the first method, would be like, oh, what is love? Is love this or is love that? Is love like that or is it not like that? When we say this, is it like that? So you're actually, one can do this to become familiar with the idea of what love is and isn't, but actually, that's not what it is meant by meditating on love and compassion and so forth. What it means to meditate on love and compassion is to use various methods to actually generate, love within our mind, because the object would be ourselves or other people, right? Mostly living beings in general, right? That would be the object. But we're not really analyzing living beings. Oh, that's a person, that's a man, that's a woman, he's tall, they're short. We're not analyzing people here, but rather having people as the object. We generate the mind in a certain aspect. We generate the mind in a certain way of perceiving these people. In this case of love, seeing them with love and affection, right? And this can be something that can be done like that. So just to take a little bit more time, because then when we one way to exemplify this is by talking about a category of meditations called the four immeasurables. So maybe a lot of you have heard about the four immeasurables meditations, which are meditating on equanimity, love, compassion, and joy, right? And these are four states of mind which are very conducive to kind of creating a very light, very calm, very peaceful mind. And it's often actually put together with the practice of shamatha, because they tend to really help each other out. It's a very good balance for the mind to, shamatha is very focused and very kind of trying to really laser pinpoint the mind, whereas the other meditations kind of open the mind up a little bit and have it become lighter and more kind of calm and peaceful. So they're often put together. So among those, if we talk about the first one, equanimity. So the mind of equanimity, it's a bit of a weird word, I know, but in short, equanimity is really about this idea that all living beings are equal in wishing to be happy and not wishing to suffer, right? Whereas we have this wrong idea, right? This, again, getting back to this idea of a view, we have this wrong view that actually people's happiness and suffering do have priorities. They have some which are less important, some which are more important, right? And this is based on the way that we categorize the world, right? Because when we look out into the world and the people within it, then we tend to categorize people into three distinct categories, into friend, enemy, and stranger, which basically means everyone else, right? So we have our friends, the people who we're close to and who have done nice things for us and which we like. And there's people who are not so nice to us, which we don't get along with and we kind of don't like very much. And then there's this gray big category of everyone else. So that in itself is not yet such a big deal, but it is then that we, on the basis of these categories, then go on to prioritize people's happiness and suffering. Because again, if we analyze, and here we're talking about where it's a case of analyzing the object. If we really analyze how we perceive our friend's happiness compared to our enemy's happiness, or our friend's suffering compared to our enemy's suffering, we see that we hold these in very different regard, right? If something wonderful happens to our friend, we're so happy. Oh, how wonderful, that's really great. If something wonderful happens to our enemy, oh God, why? There's no justice in the world, right? We tend to have that. Whereas if something horrible happens to our friend, we're like, oh my God, how could this happen? Like, it's such a tragedy and everything must stop and we must help this person. If something bad happens to our enemy, we go, you know, they deserved it. You know, yeah, I mean, it's all right, whatever. And then we have this big gray category of everyone else, which we just don't care about. We're kind of indifferent about it, right? And the problem is that part of our view in this case is thinking that these three categories are somehow part of the external world. They're part of reality. When we look at our friend, it seems obvious that they're our friend and that you know, their happiness is kind of more important like that. It's not something that we actually have to think about. It just arises in us. The view is so natural. Whereas with the enemy, it's the opposite. So, but actually, if we start analyzing these categories, right, we see that it has very little to do with the other person, right? It has actually very little to do with the other person. And it's actually all about me, right? Because if I think about the friend, then why are they in this friend category? Well, mostly they're in this friend category because they do and say nice things to me, right? And this enemy, why are they in this enemy category? Well, because they do and say not so nice things to me. And why is this stranger, all these other people we've never heard about and don't really care about in the stranger category? Well, he hasn't affected me one way or another, so take it or leave it, right? So actually, far from being about the other person, it's all about me. So it's not, so the big view that we begin with is really about this idea that this categorization of friend, enemy, stranger is somehow part of the natural world. It's really obvious, it's there, we can see it. And sometimes we kind of make these decisions very, very quickly, right? That, you know, you can kind of walk into a room and you immediately go, oh, I like those people, don't like those people, no, oh yeah, that person, yes, yes. And it's we don't like to talk about it because it's kind of taboo subject, right? We don't like to admit that we're that shallow. Okay, I'll talk about myself. But I mean, it is something that we do very instinctively and we tend to form these opinions very superficially. But they're all about us. And if we analyze the reality, if we analyze from the point of view of the object, there's nothing in that person which makes them a friend or an enemy or a stranger, right? For us, they're a friend, but someone else hates their guts. So from that perspective, they're the enemy. From our perspective, they're the friend. From another person's perspective, they're a stranger. Our worst enemy, you know, we think, oh, that person's so horrible. Who could love such a person? Well, their mother loves them very much, right? Their father loves them very much. They have their own friends. From their point of view, they're the friend. Maybe I'm the enemy, right? So these are completely to do with our own viewpoints. And once we're able to start analyzing and breaking down that view, we get to from point A, which was the wrong view that these categories are somehow an intrinsic part of reality, to the end point of the analysis, which really shows us actually these categories are completely made up by my own mind. Wow. So then we move on to this idea that, oh, so actually all these people are equal in wishing to be happy and not wishing to suffer. And you know, this person's happiness and suffering is just as important as this person's happiness and suffering. And so in terms of how we regard these people, I'm not talking yet about, this isn't a question of resource management or how much time we should spend with this person and that person. It doesn't mean that we suddenly have to hang out with all the people we don't like. but it's about, again, it's about our view and how we regard these people, how we think about these people, such that as a very bare minimum, we respect all these people equally and enough to understand that one person's happiness is just as important as another one. Because from their point of view, their happiness and suffering is just as important to them as yours is to you, and your friends is to them, and so on and so forth. So then on the basis of that, we've analyzed something, and this becomes an analyzing the object meditation to try and change that view. And once we're able to kind of level that playing field between friend, enemy, and stranger, then we can move on to this, the other three types of meditations, which are love, compassion, and joy, which again come onto the other side of the categorization, which is the taking on the aspect. Because then we can start developing this mind of, oh, so this friend, is really, they also wish to be happy and don't wish to suffer just like me. And so may they be well and happy. May they be truly well and happy. And then we just let that kind of permeate the mind, and we let the mind sit with that mind, perceiving that person, imagining that person, and sending them our love and our compassion and our joy over all the good things that they have in our lives, and letting the mind familiarize with that meditation, with that aspect, with that attitude of love, compassion, and joy. And likewise, then, where the analysis and the taking on the aspect kind of come together is that then when we move on to trying to do that with the enemy, it can be a little bit harder at first to just, yeah, I really like the enemy, may they be happy, yeah, may they be happy. So it can be a little bit difficult. So if we're able to do this equanimity meditation to try and equalize these categories a little bit, then it becomes a lot easier. It naturally opens the heart such that we're removing the roadblocks to then be able to generate that type of love universally. And that's why they're called immeasurable, because they're types of mind that can be expanded immeasurably. It doesn't cost us anything to love our enemy. In fact, like I said yesterday, the first person who gains from that is oneself. Because when we have a loving, compassionate mind, we're much happier than if we're stewing in our own anger. Like that. So I hope this kind of demonstrates this kind of a difference between these two types of meditation, both of which come into this. It's a type of analytical meditation because we're still thinking. We're still using the thinking or the imaginative part of the mind to, as I said, either developing on leveling out these categories, in this case of equanimity, using analysis, or using the taking on the aspect type of meditation to generate the mind in the sense of love and kindness towards these people. And then, using certain types of visualizations techniques, which you'll probably do with Felipe in a second, to really have the mind familiarize with that and make it grow, again, as we discussed, through familiarization, like that. So this, again, just to give you a kind of an idea. And again, these terms and these categories will come up again and again and again in the next few days as we discuss these various types of meditation and how they actually play out in practice. So if you didn't get everything that I said, I'm sorry it's a bit quick, but it'll come up again and again in the coming days, and hopefully everything will become, if not 100% clear, then at least a little bit clearer, I hope. So thank you very much, and let's move on to the questions.
All right, we have a few. There's one very quick clarification one here. Is calm abiding similar to concentration methods of meditation, or do we not have to mix up other practices?
So as I said, I would say that the general category there would be placement meditation. Because in terms of the function of what we're doing when we're sitting to practice that type of meditation, we're not doing analysis. Analysis requires a variety of objects, and we're thinking about things, and then we're thinking about this, and then we're thinking about that. So there's something very different. Here we're picking one particular object, and we're placing our mind upon it, right? So then, but then that might have different goals that one might have. Why is one doing it? There might be different reasons why one is doing this. So one reason is the practice of shamatha, the practice of calm abiding. And this is kind of seen as a separate practice, which one often can do in the, kind of as a preliminary or as a beginning practice to really solely develop the concentration aspect of the mind. And we'll talk a lot about this tomorrow and how this is done to really develop the concentration aspect of the mind. Whereas in general, we can use this kind of placement meditation also in the sense of just familiarizing the mind with certain aspects or certain insights that we've learned, really to have the mind stay with something, as opposed to kind of, we think about something, but then we move on to something else and we kind of forget about it. Whereas if we're able to stay with that insight, if we're able to stay with that, the love that we have generated, the longer that we're able to stay with it, we're able to focus on it and really let it sink in, as it were, then the more effect, the more it affects our mind, right? Now, if the question is about whether those two types of practices should or can be mixed, then in general, especially as a beginner, then it is good to do them kind of, especially in terms of generating concentration and working on our analytical meditation, then one can kind of do them alternatingly, right? Then it is often good to kind of begin the session, as we do in these sessions as well, with a little bit of calm abiding meditation to kind of calm the mind, focus the mind, and then move on to more analytical types of meditations. Like that. But it is said that as one practices these two methods more and more, then actually the mind kind of does get to a point where the mind is so focused, the mind is so single-pointedly focused, it has that capacity that it is able to then analyze, it is able to think and analyze and engage in a second type of meditation without breaking that concentration, that level of single-pointedness. But this is something very, very, very advanced, right? This can take, I don't know how long, but it's something very, very advanced that we gain on the basis of practice. The practice of trying to first develop calm abiding, then practicing this analytical type of meditation, alternating them until they slowly kind of merge. It's actually called the union of special insight and calm abiding, because eventually that power of the concentration actually becomes something that supports our analytical meditation. In the beginning, it might seem that they're contradictory because one is very stable and one is moving, right? So they kind of seem to contradict each other or harm each other. But with continued practice, they actually come closer and closer together until they kind of merge. But this is very high-end practice. If you get to that, bravo. I mean, it's very, very good. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
All right. We have another one. How not to get really affected with actions or words of people around you who are close to you, our relatives, parents, partners, etc.
Yes, I mean, that's a particularly tough one, right? Because, but again, first of all, we'll talk a lot about this, not tomorrow, but the day after, when we actually start looking specifically at these minds of attachment and anger and how they operate. But the short answer would be that it comes from, I'm sorry to repeat myself again and again, but it comes from practice, right? Because there's just, the mind as it is right now, we haven't really been paying attention so much to how the mind operates and how it reacts to these various things which pop up all of a sudden in our day-to-day lives. And so, we tend to just kind of be in whatever situation we're in, where sometimes we're okay, sometimes we can handle a bit more, sometimes we can't handle a bit more. And at the moment, it's like we're a slave of our own mind, simply because we haven't put this concentrated effort to try and tame the mind. But then through continued practice, which we'll see in the coming days, really comes from learning to first recognize these minds as negative, and then seeing different ways in which we can think about them, that helps us to kind of slowly change the view aspect of things. Then slowly, it will also translate into the way that we behave in terms of how we kind of actively behave, but also how we react, right? So that's kind of the long-term project. In the short term, like as I said, it's really about trying our best, right? Some people say kind of fake it till you make it. I think that's a bit dangerous because we it's dangerous to go into pretension and kind of pretending to be someone we're not. But it's really about trying your best and trying to learn from your mistakes and trying to see that actually the first step is to recognize that anger and the behavior that anger engenders is solely negative. Right? And even that idea already helps us kind of catch ourselves that if, maybe we threw the punch, right? So then it's too late to take that back, but at least we can think, oh, that wasn't a good thing to do. We can generate regret and we can learn from that mistake. Or maybe we catch ourselves before we throw the punch. We already got angry, but we were about to throw the punch and we can say, no, okay. I'm angry, but I'm not going to make it worse. I'm going to take myself out of the situation and try to calm myself down. Maybe we catch ourselves a little bit earlier before the anger even arises and we're like, oh, I'm getting angry. So let's try to switch the way that I'm looking at this situation right now, because if I continue down this road, the punch is going to come. So, even before the anger arises, we can change the way that we perceive the situation. And again, how much we've practiced beforehand is how much we're capable or able to do that, in the field, when it actually in the practice, right, in the situation itself. And then, until we get back even further to the point where, it doesn't arise in the first place. So it can be a slowly kind of going backwards and trying to catch ourselves as soon as we can. And again, this is something that comes with practice and familiarity, because we're not so used to being aware of ourselves and aware of what the body, speech, and mind is doing in any particular moment. But the greater awareness that we can develop with this respect, and this comes actually from the shamatha type of meditation. It is a translatable skill. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. That comes from the shamatha meditation. Becoming more aware of what our body, speech, and mind is doing in any particular moment, then we're better able to catch ourselves, or better able to kind of deal with things at an earlier stage in that process, and like that. But again, this will become clearer, hopefully, in the next coming days.
All right, so there's one. Do you want to do one more, or do you want to go to meditation?
Sure, let's do one more.
Okay, and I think actually it's related to the meditation we're about to do. So
okay.
If you want to expand on it, it says, how can we have genuine compassion for a malicious individual or nation that is bent on hating you?
Yeah. So again, that kind of translates into kind of compassion and love for the enemy. Yeah, when we say enemy, it can kind of translate. Enemy is just a category, but as the person asking the question says, it can be a person or it can be a country, and someone who we see is really malicious and angry and harming others even sometimes. So I don't want to go too much into the various types of ways that they're thinking about it to do with anger, and we'll talk about this not tomorrow but the day after in great detail. But even on the very basic level, to think that on the one hand, as we said before, even this person, regardless of the way in which they're behaving, right, they're just like us on the very basic level. They want to be happy and they don't wish to suffer, exactly like us, right? And just like us, they have all these various negative states of mind, like anger, like attachment, like pride. And it is these states of mind which are making them behave in such a way, right? But actually, if we think about the states of mind of anger, right, we know that if someone is harming someone, that is a behavior that has resulted from anger. But actually, so we think, okay, so this person is displaying a behavior which is indicative that they have anger in their mind right now. And with practice of equanimity and with practice of thinking about anger and how to deal with anger, then one can transform one's reaction to get angry with there's anger over there and you get angrier as a response, to actually transform that reaction into compassion. Because we know what it's like to be angry. And when we're angry, it's not a very pleasant feeling, right? It's a very horrible state of mind to be in. So we think, oh, that person is obviously incredibly angry, there's so much mental pain that they're experiencing right now. So, oh, that's something really horrible. That is, we often say, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. Well, it's exactly like this. We're looking at our worst enemy right now, and put your money where your mouth is, right? Because it's really like, oh, this person is suffering so much. And as a result of their suffering, they're also engaging in all these actions that are causing suffering to other people. So, whereas anger would get up right now and say, okay, so the best way to deal with this is to, eliminate that guy, hurt them, kill them, do whatever we can to eliminate them. But actually, that person is looking to eliminate suffering, even if their methods are really genuinely, out of touch with reality, right? And actually creating more suffering. They're wishing to eliminate suffering, but they're creating more suffering for others and for themselves. Then actually, if we put our thinking caps on right now, it's like, actually, if we want to help everyone in the situation, because our goal is to eliminate suffering, then the best way to eliminate those people suffering, the victims and the perpetrators suffering, is to help that person, right? Because they also want to be rid of their own suffering, but they're just engaging in really negative ways of doing it. So we transform our view, we transform our reaction from one of anger to one of genuine compassion, seeing that this person is also undergoing they're undergoing so much suffering that they're also, inflicting suffering of others. So, in Tibetan it's saying "Ningje," really, oh my God, right? And so we try to help that person. And through helping that person, we also indirectly help the other people. But it is very possible to develop this kind of reaction. And it is actually a much more beneficial way to react to the situation. Because again, anger will only distort the situation and will actually lead us to engage in actions that long-term will actually probably be more detrimental for everyone involved. We seek to eliminate one bit of suffering, but then we create suffering for others. And, anger and violence only creates more suffering. But our goal was to eliminate suffering, right? So the only thing that can really help and eliminate suffering is this mind of compassion. So again, not trying to see this person just in the sense of, they're horrible, they're hurting people, but trying to see them as the human being that they are, or the country that they are, which again, the country is just made up of human beings. And these human beings, again, they're not perfect, just like us. They have anger and attachment and all these things just like us. But then thinking, actually, they're in a much worse situation than us because their anger and attachment is so out of hand that they're even inflicting pain on others. So actually, oh my God, my heart goes out just thinking about such a situation, right? And the best way to help them is not to harm them, but to help them, right? It's strange to think that we help people by harming them. It's completely contradictory, but that's one of the lies that anger tells us, right? So again, trying to see that the best reaction is compassion, not anger. But it's not easy, obviously. It takes practice. Yeah. So, and that is, again, sorry, one more thing. So that is based upon this idea of trying to see through this very basic level of what we see about reality as if that is really how reality is, like this enemy is really in the enemy category, and that's who they are, that's what defines them. And so, if evil is inherently evil like that, and there's nothing we can do about it, then yeah, the only way to get rid of it is to destroy or to kind of put them away out of society. But if we see that actually this is a human being after all, this is a living being who wishes to be happy and doesn't wish to suffer, right? We separate the person from their behavior, then we can still have compassion for the person while, dealing with their behavior. And the way we deal with the behavior can be very forceful. But if it comes from a point where we see them as a living being who wishes to be happy, doesn't wish to suffer, having this love and compassion for them too, then the way in which we deal with the situation is much more likely to succeed and much more likely to be beneficial for everyone. Like that. So thinking along those lines. So again, this is a very good demonstration about why these meditations kind of go between the analyzing the object and the taking on the aspect. Because you might be trying to take on the aspect of love and compassion towards the enemy, but you find that you can't do it. So then you stop for a second and you use the other method, the analyzing the object, to think about these things just in the way that I just explained. Okay, so maybe it isn't like that. It's the way that I'm perceiving that person, really the way that they are, and so on and so forth, until you're able to change the way that you see that person. And you go back to the taking the aspect type of meditation and send them love and compassion as much as one can. And by continuous practice of doing this, it becomes easier and easier, and one becomes better and better at doing it until one is able to genuinely do it without much effort. As we said, there is nothing whatsoever that does not become easier through familiarization. Yeah. Lasso.
All right. So
thank you very much, everyone, and I leave you in the capable hands of Felipe for the meditation. Sorry that we're late again, but I hope you're all okay with that, and I'll see you tomorrow again for the next class. Thank you very much.
thank you so much, Ahar. So please, everyone, set up your posture for meditation. Make sure that you're steady, stable and comfortable, and that you can basically let the body rest. So keeping the mind alert. And let's start by preparing the body first, allowing the awareness to descend into the space of physical sensations, becoming aware of whatever sensations arise in the area where your body is in contact with the surface that you're sitting on, whether it be a chair, a cushion, a mattress, or the floor itself. Simply become grounded in those sensations. Then letting go of all tension and tightness in the body. As much as possible, noticing the places, the spots in the body where tension tends to accumulate, such as the neck, the shoulders, the muscles of the face, around the eyes. Try to soften as much as possible every single muscle, every single part of the body, no matter how big or how small. Releasing all tension and all agitation. Setting the body at ease. And now just take a minute to experience your body in its natural state, free of tension, free of movement, and yet vigilant. And so we can let go of observing the body and the physical sensations. No need to pay attention to them anymore. We bring the attention inwardly and begin the meditation. So in order to cultivate equanimity, we will first conjure up or visualize in the space in front of you a person that you like, a friend, a loved one, somebody who you're close to, and then a person that you might not know very well, and finally a person that you dislike, that you perhaps have some qualms with, or that you don't approve of their behavior, someone who we would consider to be an enemy. So just maintaining the presence of the awareness of these three people in front of you throughout the meditation. And switching your attention from one to the other, try to notice your emotional reaction to their presence in front of you. Is there a difference when you bring your attention to the friend, to the stranger, and to the enemy? Are you able to detect, even if it's quite subtle changes, this feeling of attachment towards a friend, indifference towards a stranger, an aversion for the enemy? So let's start to investigate why this is. Think about your relationship with these three people, starting with the friend. Why do you consider this person to be your friend? Is it because how they behave towards you, because you like them? Really check if the ego is involved. Try to see if you can acknowledge that your own perception definitely affects the way you view this person. But is your own perception completely and absolutely valid? Or is it just one aspect of a much larger view? You can do the same with the stranger and the enemy. asking yourself, why is it that I consider this person to be a stranger or an enemy? Is it because how they behave or what they do for me or to me? And then you can also investigate if you have a sense if these relationships are permanent, unchanging. Do you consider that the friend will always be a friend, an enemy will always be distant? But is that really true? You can try and bring an awareness of impermanence, of the fact that relationships change all the time, that perhaps the person that you now consider to be your friend is in the past a stranger, and that given the circumstances, even your enemy could become your friend. So, why is it that we hold on to these labels and that we consider them to be unchanging, impermanent? So, instead of focusing on the differences between all of us, what about acknowledging the common ground between yourself and these three other people? What about the fact that we all want to be happy and free of suffering? This is true not just for yourself, but actually for every being. This, of course, includes your friend, the stranger, and the enemy. And loving kindness is a mind that wishes others to be happy. And we can cultivate this awareness within ourselves, and it can be cultivated towards anyone. So bringing your attention to your friend, acknowledge the common ground between you two, and think how wonderful it would be if this friend of mine would be happy. So from your heart, you can think, may you be happy and have all the causes and conditions that bring you happiness and joy. And visualizing that this wish manifests in the form of a bright white light shining from your heart. As you breathe out, send love from your heart to your friend. Imagine that this light transforms into whatever this person needs to be happy. Imagine that they become joyful and satisfied. Wishing, may you be well and happy. And then gently turning your attention to a stranger, this person whose name you might not even know, who you might just have seen a couple of times in your life. And yet you can acknowledge this person as a fellow human being. And for sure, this person, just like you, wants to be happy and deserves to be happy. So allowing this wish of loving kindness within your heart once again, thinking how wonderful it would be if this person had all the happiness and joy that they wish for and deserve. Sincerely wishing, may you be happy. May you be well and happy. Breathing out with loving kindness, shining this bright light. Allowing your thoughts to reach them, your wishes. Imagining this light transforming into whatever they need to be happy and joyful. And being joyful yourself that you have the opportunity to do this. Now gently turning your attention toward your enemy, this person who you find difficult, who perhaps has hurt you or behaves in ways that you don't approve of. And yet once again, in front of you, you have a fellow human being, a person who has their own struggles, their own sufferings, their own problems, just like everyone else, just like you. And yet, even your enemy wants to be happy and free of suffering. So once again, allowing your heart to open up, cultivating from within this thought of loving kindness, thinking, may you have happiness and all the causes of happiness. Shining this bright white light as you breathe out. Imagining that it transforms into whatever this person needs and deserves to be happy. And imagine that their behavior and their actions also transform. They become joyful, pleasant. And now simply allow these three people to dissolve. And simply stay with the thought that you can mentally equalize everyone as important as you. That you don't need to discriminate between enemy, friend, or stranger. That you can cultivate positive and beneficial mental states toward each of them. This does not mean that you need to go and hug your enemy when you see them. On a practical level, you can maintain a distance from those who harm you. But mentally, we cultivate this openness, this receptiveness to the fact that everyone wants to be happy. And gently coming out of the meditation and acknowledging any virtuous action, any positive potential we've created. We'll just read through the dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain a notion of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and find repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth and those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the mysteries of the world. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for joining today's session and for staying during the meditation. I know that we went over quite a few minutes, but I think it's great to receive as much material from Shahar as we can. So hopefully that's not inconvenient for you all. So see you tomorrow, same time, and have a good day, have a good evening, have a good afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you. Goodbye.